for you.
Hello.
So we wanted to celebrate this with you. And we're all gonna sing, because 10 years is a celebration. Everybody ready?
Well,
Happy birthday
To
you. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday, dear Personio. Happy birthday to you. Make some noise, everybody. 10 years, Personio.
That was only slightly embarrassing.
yeah, a little bit.
So yeah, it's you're not a person who needs any introduction, given sort of the iconic status of the company, and probably that a lot of the people in the audience are users. But what not maybe everyone knows is that you were here 8.5 years ago, reflecting on 18 months of building a SaaS company. Here we are at the 10-year mark. What would you tell the young Hanno from 8.5 years ago?
It's going to be a long journey. I think it's yeah. When you go through a study program, it's like you do a few years bachelor's and you do master. Like you're not used to think. Or I wasn't used to thinking in these long horizons. You're like, oh yeah, I'm going to do this for a few years and then probably something else will come along. But then that time frame of how long we're going to do this just continue to expand and expand, because you see this as there's just so much more to do and so much more to build and so much more customer serve, and then you just realize, okay, there's just a very, very different time frame than anything you've thought about before. And yeah, that's probably what I would tell myself coming back to thinking this is not just going to be a quick ride.
Good. And so in a long run like this, there's a lot of ups and downs. What is some of the takeaways you took from them?
So I think one of the takeaways is that during the times where you're the most successful and the company is the most successful and the company grows the fastest, is actually the periods where you make the most mistakes. Mm-hmm. And it's also not really the period you learn the most. Of course, you're challenged and there's other things, and there's always stuff happening, but I think those periods, enjoy them while they last, they're always gonna end and then they hopefully come back. But I do think whenever we look at periods that we created debt in whatever form, whether it's technical debt, organizational debt, process debt, so everything we kind of had to clean up later. That was during period when things actually on paper look amazing, and vice versa in the periods that maybe are a bit more troubling, where you have more headwinds and you're cleaning out these stuff. That's when you actually not just learn how to fix these things, but also as a person, that's the areas where you grow the most, where you're the most challenged, and while they're certainly probably harder in the outset, you kind of start to realize they're also the ones that make you grow. And I think if that's what you enjoy, then those are also good times, but just in a very different way. And it's been a type 2 fun.
And do you think this is a necessity, or sort of can people learning from this do stuff differently, especially in the good times?
I think it's a little bit built into the system, because during those times when you're growing 200% year on year and everything just goes like, then of course you also have things to think about. You're like, oh, how do I now fulfill all this demand? How do we get really far? And then per definition, there's only so much you can focus on. Of course, in an ideal world, and if you now think back to all these points, and if I could take the learnings and the knowledge I have today back into these times, I would probably say, oh yeah, this point we should have done this different and this different. I'm not sure though if I were to now, even with my knowledge being that place, would I have then the time to focus on these things, or would you still be focused on other things and then do the same mistakes again? So hopefully some I would not do again, and hopefully whenever I talk to early stage founders, there's some things I can fix, but just by the very nature, I mean, even the investor's going to be like, yeah, exciting, let's go, how can we do it more? And that's obviously then not the period where they're like, oh, but if we just do all these things in parallel, we're going to really mess up these systems, and we probably now need to think about how this foundation needs to work. You just don't really focus on this. And I think you can, of course, probably doing it again, do some things differently and better.
And of the things you have sort of changed by sort of difficult learnings? What is something that stands out as a, hey, that was a thing I really learned from, and now therefore I'm doing something very different?
So I do think it's like going to abstract this a little bit and make it one concrete example. I think there's a lot of times when you think you figured something out, and then, or at least for me, but I think as a first-time founder, you go through like, yeah, then this needs to be a solution, and then you go all in on this, and then you really think, oh yeah, now we're really committed, we're just going to fix it. And then you at some point realize now you created this other problem, then you swing back, and or you realize you're creating a new problem with that. and I think the learning behind that, and I'll give a concrete example to make it more tangible in a second, but the learning behind it is, I think, that you have to hold these polarities, and that both things are true at the same time. And one example was when, I think it was 2018 or 19, realizing that we were having, during a lot of pace of really fast growth, built a lot of technical debt. And then we were debating this, and then we had, of course, all these other priorities that we want to do, and then we're like, oh no, now we're just going to sit down, we're really going to focus on this, and the next 12 months, 18 months, I can't remember the exact time, we're just going to fix the technical debt, and it's going to be amazing because of all of these things, and you probably remember the board slide where we presented this, and I think there was even this little Ferrari icon for after, like, yeah, and then we're going to be really fast. And then turns out, obviously it was not a great decision because during that time we just didn't ship enough product to our customers. And at the same time, we also then went way too far on some of the technical debt fixing, where we went then from, oh, you want to go from monolith to microservices, but then we went to 120 microservices, which we then later on realized creates all kinds of other problems, and you need to go back. So I think the learning from that is generally that typically for most things, probably in life, but also certainly in building a company, there's a balancing those two polarities, integrating them together, and then figuring out what is the right solution. And seldomly that just going all in, and this is now the one thing that only matters, is the right solution.
Great. Let me change pace a little bit. Obviously, in Personio, you have a company that has always cared a lot about culture, and being in the HR space, I think, doubly so. And you're one of the very few companies in Europe that has gone to hundreds of millions of revenue and thousands of people working there. You must have gone through some very distinct phases in terms of the culture. How would you sort of describe them, and how would you describe sort of managing the shifts?
I think one of the things, as a founder, you'll naturally will get to hear at some point, and it's typically initially something you don't like to hear, is like, oh, the culture is changing, and you see it through engagement surveys, and you talk to early employees, like, yeah, this is not how it used to be anymore. And that is true and can be false at the same time. And I think it's true that working at a company that is hundreds or even thousands of people is necessarily different than it's 10 and 20. Like, there's a physical law of you can't replicate the same experience for people. As a founder, you can't be as close to everyone as you've ever before, and so on. So some things will feel different. And then the question is, what are things that are so fundamental that you want to keep the same? And I still believe, for example, that we generally have a hiring process that finds good people from a values perspective, and that have good intentions, and that want to do the right thing for the customers, that want to do the right thing to support the colleagues. And then, of course, there's sometimes things where you then set the wrong incentives, and then it feels like, oh, now, but it's gotten political. But that's not because you have the wrong people necessarily, if your hiring process is broken, but maybe because you've setting the incentive the wrong way, or you're not providing the right context for them to work together. And that then feels like the culture is changing. And then lastly, of course, culture also, to some extent, you want to change it, and you want to also, as with everything else, as with your product, you learn about the bugs and the feedback from your customers, and you're learning what is working, what's not working, and therefore there's also some things as part of your culture where you realize this is working really well, this is what makes it successful, and these are things that are actually flaws in our culture, and we need to address and fix.
And as you hit that stage of relative size where you are now, how do you avoid stifling innovation, getting kind of slow, and being the one who's being disrupted by the ones coming next to you?
So I'll share one anecdote again to these mistakes that you sometimes do as you scale, and I think it's the type that you partially create roles or teams that they're not really solving a specific problem that you have, but they're sort of helping others solve the problem. And some of these are important. Of course, you need at some point some of these quote-unquote support functions, but you can also overdo that, which we certainly have done at some point. And I listened to a TED Talk once where they're talking about, oh yeah, and then this company has a problem between the front office and the back office. And what they do, they create a middle office. And of course, you're just creating 2 more interfaces that create friction and problems. And initially, when I listened to it, it's like, yeah, this is a problem of big corporates. But no, then I realized there's so many quote-unquote middle offices that we created where we made it harder for people to solve a problem because they're interacting with too many stakeholders to get that done. And so what we have done recently is we did an assessment of all of our core processes, how we bring our product to market, how we build up, how we ship new features, and so on, and then really try to simplify how that flow works and how someone that works in that process can get what they need to get done in the easiest and simplest way possible.
That must feel good.
It's hard work, but it feels good when you realize that you were able to speed that up for sure.
It is 2025, so no talk can bypass the topic of AI. And obviously, on the one hand, there's the whole OpenAI will build anything and Personio will be irrelevant, or any client of yours will use Lovable and build their own little Personio. How do you see that threat?
I mean, first of all, there's this great book which from Andy Grove on Only Paranoid Survive. So certainly, I think being paranoid helps in any phase of the business, but certainly also when there's big shifts and you need to challenge yourself, okay, what is the impact on us and how can we react to it? And then at the same time, I think there's a little bit of over-fear sometimes that these companies now will dominate everything. And the example I'd like to give there is also 10 years ago, everyone was like, oh, but why wouldn't Google or Microsoft do the thing that you're doing? And the reason to that, or the reality, is that they're going to focus on a few very, very large horizontal categories that support their overall mode and that they can do, and for everything else they have then their GCP or AWS or whatever to support others to build stuff on top. Because it's not practical for, I mean, if you're building and trying to compete with Microsoft Word or Google Docs, of course that's going to be hard because those are categories that make sense for them to own, same with a mail server and so on. But for many of these other verticals, and these verticals can be massively, of course, they're still both too small and too difficult to attack for Google, because they would still need to then also build a sales force to sell to all these customers. Just because they're Google, that doesn't mean all these customers are just going to go, or Microsoft buy that out of hand. So they still need to access all of them. Then they still need to build and understand the customer needs. So unless it's a very horizontal problem that literally every company in the world has, that's not going to go away. And that was the case for Google, Microsoft, and Amazon. The same is true for OpenAI and Anthropic. I don't, of course, have any insight in their product roadmap, but I'm sure they'll be focusing on building a couple of really horizontal products, like the coding agents that Anthropic is now doing. Those are big categories which they can provide multi-purpose technology towards. But I don't think they're necessarily set up to go now in every single vertical. And that's why, they're providing APIs, and are happy for Personio and others to build on top of them, and they make a lot of money with that. So their incentives are aligned. And then on the other end, of course, there's the lovables and the vibe coding and so on. And I think again, being paranoid helps, and figuring out what you can learn, how you can employ these technologies. And at the same time, there's also something of, even if you can vibe code, and let's assume there's not all these problems right now with the logic not being really figured out and so on. Let's assume that was all possible. Still, if I could now with natural language write a solution, and it wasn't Personio but something else, I would have no idea of the depth of the customer problems. I could of course say, oh yeah, we probably need, for an HR software, an absence engine, so let's wipe code an absence engine. But I haven't spoken to 15,000 customers every single day, as we have at Personio, to figure out all the intricate details that this absence engine needs to get done. And I think that's a competitive advantage for everyone that builds product over just this two-person vibe coding team, because you need to, at least if it's complex problems, you need to understand them in depth enough. And I think that's something where I do believe we have a reason to continue to build in our shape as well.
And the flip side of it, sort of, what does AI bring Personio, and what does it bring for your customers?
Exactly, and then of course you have the benefit of it that we have data from these over 15,000 customers that we can use to train our own agents. We have all these learnings, and then we can, of course, on top of existing distribution, of course, of existing features, embed a lot of intelligence. And of course, I don't think there's all this like, does AI kill SaaS? I mean, SaaS is a software. The same was SaaS never killed software. There's always software and people use it. And yes, there's different deployment mechanisms behind that. But ultimately, it's a software that solves a problem. And the same way how there were a bunch of other technologies that were added to the software stack, AI is just another technology with you can solve some of these problems differently and then more powerful. And when I think about Personio, there's one, the layer of helping our customers use our product in a different way. Of course, if you have an HR manager that's maybe not super technical, but can, with natural language, ask Personio to create me that kind of report or this workflow or whatever, that makes it easier for them to than if you have to click that together somehow in the interface where you might be overwhelmed if it's a complex topic. Then there's a lot of automation we can do. Automation was always a key part of our value proposition for customers, and one that was really important, and that's one that will continue to leverage AI to make the automation more powerful, save customers more time. And lastly, insights, I think, is also a really interesting point with all that wealth of data, not just we have, but our customers have in their accounts. Drawing data, we call it proactive insights, or providing them with insights of something they might not be able to oversee because they don't have data scientists scrolling 24/7 the HR data. But if we can surface these insights, we can also provide a lot of value. So I think there's a ton of exciting opportunities for us that we're investing in, that we have been shipping. We'll be launching soon at our Hack conference the next set of AI features. And
so you're not going to reveal that here.
No, but there's many customers that will watch our Hack keynote in 2 weeks, and that will learn what we get to ship there.
Exciting. Hey, and on the personal side, you have gone through a lot of personal growth in the last 10 years. You've created some amazing stuff. What is the key qualities that you have developed that help you be a founder and help you drive the company?
So I think, first of all, nothing, of course, prepares you for the journey. I don't think even if I started a new company, I was a little bit more prepared, but also not really, because in a new space, you figured out everything from scratch. I do think, though, the one thing that was important from the beginning and will remain true for probably many more years is this constantly being in a space of uncertainty, in a space of a little bit discomfort. And I think that's something you need to embrace, something you need to enjoy. And then it can be a lot of fun to do that. But if you, of course, constantly feel like this puts you a ton of tension on you, just the fact that, of course, a bunch of stuff is uncertain and not know, then that is difficult. So I think that training that resilience and training that enjoying the being in cold water, how I sometimes call it, is something that is important and something that will help every founder go through the ups and downs that necessarily come through. And I think that's the one thing. There's just during the last years also gotten to know some amazing founders from even much bigger companies than Personio, and some of the ones that you think, they've just always went up and to the right. It just is never the case. Like every single company and every founder I met had some really, really rough patches along the journey, and I think that's just part of building it and enjoying that and embracing that journey is what makes it then fun. Amazing. Well, we're out of time, but hopefully we're looking forward to another 10 years like this, and that we sit here again in 10 years' time reviewing on 20 years of journey. Absolutely. I would love that. Thank you very much. Thanks, Hanno.